So maybe we do start. It's about 3 minutes past, and we have great content. So for those that will join late, well, they'll just catch up. And by the way, this call is being recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, just want you to make you aware that this call is being recorded. Purpose of this, and thank you for joining, is to answer how can retailers compete with well-established online marketplaces. As you know, marketplaces have taken on more than just the marketplace component, but also a whole logistics aspect. And what we'll be focusing on is improving delivery speed and reducing costs. And you might think that that's not possible, but we want to challenge that thinking through network redesign. So this is being presented in collaboration between Pharad Advisors, Scaleup Inc, and Lambda. And if we go to the next page, our speakers will be myself. We have Marcos Buelva of Scaleup, and also Gaurav Mogra of Lambda. The whole genesis of this call is that we were just talking amongst ourselves, and we just realized, and we come from different backgrounds, all in supply chain, by the way. I specialize in last mile delivery. Marcos and Gaurav in more the supply chain, working a lot with retailers, pharma companies, and a lot on simulation. But we were just thinking about what we were discussing, and there's a lot of synergies happening between what they were seeing and what I was seeing, and hence the purpose of this call. So what I'd like to do is just to move forward. We're going to be speaking in this order. So we have kind of 3 sessions. If we go to the next slide. We have, so we'll start with direct-to-consumer strategies, unit economics, what's happening in the marketplace. This will be very useful for retailers who might not kind of have that perspective and only work as customers to large carriers such as FedEx's, UPS's, and USPS. And then we'll get into a case study where we did look at looking at direct-to-consumer and how that actually saved a client 15%. And then we'll also, after that, get into a simulation of how retailers can look at kind of their current supply chain, do some simulation to see what the benefits would be going towards a new model. Then we'll have some Q&A and some final key takeaways. Let's move on. So let me just start off by giving you a bit of context around what's happening in the parcel industry, e-commerce in general. I'm assuming that all of you are involved in e-commerce in some way. But I just want to give you some background here. I mean, if you go back to COVID as the starting point, I mean, e-commerce has been growing, I would say exponentially or significantly above GDP for probably the past 20 years. And COVID was an exceptional event where it grew even faster. And then what we saw in 2020, think about 2021, and that's the time where everybody was confined and on a couch, and the only thing that could bring them pleasure, for lack of a better word, was to order stuff online. But then when the economy started opening in 2022, people could travel, go to restaurants, and kind of that took away a bit of the wind inside e-commerce. Nevertheless, so 2022 was a bit soft. Then 2023 was a little bit better. And we expect that in 2024, we have still some very good, strong indicators from a macroeconomics perspective. The only thing that could provide a downturn would be the consumer sentiment, especially with regards to inflation. So that's kind of where we are. Inflation, I'll talk a little bit more about. The parcel carriers themselves, despite all the ups and downs from a volume perspective, and by the way, volumes are still way up and about 1 million higher than ahead of pre-pandemic estimates. Just so you know, it's still e-commerce is still very strong, but we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown moving forward, more on a multi-year perspective, where the growth isn't double digits like it used to be. It might be more in this high single digits, and that's just natural as it matures. The parcel carriers, however, and I'm thinking about FedEx, UPS, DHL, all of those, including all of the posts and all of the other carriers that I haven't mentioned, are facing essentially high labor costs as a result of COVID and just general inflation pressures, fuel and others. And so the larger partners or the larger carriers will typically pass that on to their customers by way of an annual rate increase. and surcharges. So that's what they typically do. We're starting to see that their pricing power is starting to decline a little bit, because what we're seeing, last bullet point on the right hand side, is growth of what we call regional carriers, and also new carriers or companies that offer micro fulfillment. I'll talk about a few of them, and that offer an alternative to dealing with the large carrier networks. So, and that's what we'll focus on in this call today. But the point here is that with the growth of a lot of the what I would call the shipping platforms, it has taken a lot of the power out of the large carriers and given it to the consumers and those platforms in such a way that you can now, especially if you're a small, medium-sized kind of e-commerce player, really shop around and get better rates. And that's kind of what we've seen with the growth of a lot of these regional carriers as well. So let's move on. That kind of gives you a bit of a view of the market there. So the other thing that we're seeing, and so I was at a conference in Barcelona on last mile, and about a week ago, same thing we're seeing across the board. Fast has been getting faster, and retailers can benefit from this speed. So you can see the only chart on this slide, the upper left-hand side, this is transit time in number of days. Now, there was a time in the US where 5-day delivery was still acceptable. Then went down to 2-day, and that's what was the norm for a long time. But right now we're kind of really, and this is an average, by the way, but we're seeing now best in class is really same day delivery. Excuse me, and that is what kind of we are going to talk a bit more about in the coming slides. But speed does work, and I'll give you. There's a reason why Amazon is continuing to invest in what are delivery stations, what are kind of their last mile, and really local metro network. It's because speed does provide results to retailers. So first of all, it increases the customer acquisition. So if you have a new customer and you can offer same day or next day, that is beneficial. It leads to more complete transactions. So people will abandon if they kind of realize that it arrives in 3, 4, 5 days, or even 2 days if there's a better alternative, and there are. Speed increases conversion rates by usually a factor of 2, driven by same-day delivery for online e-commerce merchants. All of these data points have sources, by the way. Speed also keeps your customers on your website longer, and also they drive customer purchase recurrence. So speed also helps retain your current customers, and above all, not only speed, but also the whole last mile delivery experience, right? So you have to have a reliable partner to do that. Let's move on. So if I've convinced you that speed matters, if you're a retailer, because it does, and it does provide benefits, and we'll talk, and a lot of these maybe you might say only on the top line, and the cost may actually increase. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But if you are a typical retailer, you'll have one of these scenarios, and most likely the first two. So you have one national DC, which is located somewhere where you have all of your stores, or you have 4 or 5 regional DCs around the US, and that's kind of to help lower the cost and also increase the speed. Now, the difference between the two is if you have one national DC, you have 2 options. You can do fast, which would be next day or even 2-day if you have but it'll cost you because you use an express product, right? So it's overnight, it's flown usually by air, and it'll cost you $20, $50 depending on the size, weight, and all of that. Or you can use ground, but if you are in one location and you have a client way at the other end of the country, it could take 6 or 7 days to do that. So there you kind of go through all the different zones. The pricing is different and so on, but a little bit less expensive, but still you don't have kind of a world-class or really differentiated speed when you have that model. And then to be fair, most of these retailers or the retailers that have kind of this model typically are used to fulfilling stores rather than onesies and twosies going out to the consumer. So you have to deal with what you have, but I'm just kind of giving you some perspective around what are the options. 4 or 5 delivery regional DCs, you can get to 2-day delivery in most cases, and sometimes perhaps even 1, depending on the location of the consumer. And that'll be still around $10, $20. And then lastly, the micro fulfillment or store fulfillment. If you kind of you're basically eliminating all of the line haul here and looking just at the mile, which can include fulfillment and pick and pack and last mile delivery in a metro area. So think Greater Los Angeles, Greater Miami. Then you can get rates that are in the $4 to $6 range, and in this particular case, could be 4. It could be same day or D+1, so next day delivery. So this gives you a view of even also the typical carriers that offer this type of service, and then some of the comments. I mean, the fastest service is indeed the store micro fulfillment model, and we'll dig that into that and why, and offer you some comparisons moving forward. Next slide. Best example of this same day delivery and the kind of the model is Amazon. And you may like them, you may not like them. As a consumer, they're hard to beat and they have raised the bar. But if you look at kind of the chart here of the different DCs and facilities in general across the US back in 05 and 2022, the left-hand chart, you can see here that you know, they start off with 4 or 5 DCs around, and they start off actually with 1 DC in Seattle, probably 10 years before that. But you can see that they've exploded to about 1,200 different facilities. Some are whole food stores, that's okay, but they have a lot of fulfillment centers, delivery stations, which are local delivery, and they have a number of other different kind of facilities in here and some sortation. But the point is that, you know, Amazon now can offer 6-hour delivery, now 6-hour delivery on over, not just, this is not a niche product, on over 3 million different SKUs, and I'm sure some of them compete against what you offer today. And if you do use Fulfilled by Amazon, you know, what I've heard, some retailers are not that, I guess, happy working with Amazon. There's always a risk of, you know, the data and getting copied and having an Amazon basic product appearing. Some are happy with Amazon, but generally, you know, this gives you at least a view of Amazon. And let me talk a little bit more about what the concept or the benefits were of moving towards the inventory closer to the consumer, because that's what we're talking about. Amazon saw a 65% jump in same day and overnight deliveries in 2023 because of these investments. So like I said, Amazon, the same day does work and it does drive sales considerably. Now, to talk a little bit about some additional, I guess, data points, you might say, you know, well, you have if Amazon offers these same day products, typically it's called Amazon Prime Now. You might be asked to pay an extra $2.99 if this is over $25. And you might say, well, that, you know, barely covers the cost, right? Because it's pretty expensive to do same day. Well, hold on. Because if the average vehicle, like one of these Sprinter vans, covers or has about 300 parcels, and they do 100 to 150 stops, and you have good drop density, and you take into account labor costs, and these are direct costs, but we estimate the delivery cost of doing this with this type of delivery is about $1 to $1.50. In fact, some say it's actually lower than $1, but let's say, you know, let's provide this range. So this is actually pretty competitive. So they do have that critical mass, and it does help them. But you can see here that just on the last mile, that's where you need really the density. If we move on to the next slide, it'll give you an idea of kind of the evolution. So this is the evolution of, I guess, traditional e-commerce. If you look at the first line at the very top, this is what a typical company would do. They'd you know, call a large carrier. They'd say, can you pick it up at my door? And then it would go through a pickup, a fulfillment centers, maybe an origin sort, destination sort, goes to delivery unit, and then is delivered to the consumer. That when you look at the amount of steps in here, there's a lot of handling, material handling. So every time there's the saying, every time you touch a parcel, it costs more. So you see that there's a substantial amount of touching here across multiple facilities. If I go to the very bottom where you have marketplaces that put the inventory really close to the consumer, you skip a lot of these. Zone skipping can also help that. That's kind of the middle one here. But you know, you inherently lower the cost by having less handling in doing so. So Mark we'll talk a little bit more about that in his section, but I just wanted to give you kind of, this is what we're seeing and why there's that push towards fast and doesn't necessarily mean more expensive. Next slide. So before I go into this, the other benefit, there's no slide for this, but the other benefit, there's a study that was done by Accenture about a year and a half ago that says, you know, when you go to micro fulfillment centers and inventory close to consumers, you can actually improve your carbon footprint because you can use smaller vehicles. So instead of a 5-ton truck or even a Sprinter, you can use a cargo bike. Your loops are smaller, so you can do more of these, and they're local, so less kilometers or miles. And then lastly, you can put the consumer can pick up through parcel lockers as well. And the stem time, lastly, is smaller because you don't have to kind of cross the city to start your first delivery. A lot of good stuff from I guess, a carbon footprint perspective. Here's an example of because you might say, well, where do I find these companies? And again, just one example. But this is gently. They're based in LA. They have 2 nano fulfillment centers, and they're expanding into New York City. So they offer a 6-day flat rate, which includes fulfillment, pick and pack, and reliable, guaranteed same-day delivery. They started about last, I guess, March or April, and they now have 35 different national retailers working with them. They have a seamless and efficient integration, so moving to them is relatively easy. They have a very high NPS score, as you can see here against some of the major competitors that you might know. And if I go to the next page, I'll just explain, and I'll end my section here with the nano fulfillment center. How it works is that they have the nano fulfillment centers in LA. Okay, so they're already in the city, and so you provide the inventory to them, or they can go and pick it up even from a store. They hold it, they manage it, the orders go through them, they pick and pack, and then they establish the routes and they deliver. So it's not rocket science, but they do this very well, and they do this on a local basis, and they use W2 employees just to ensure consistency of the experience. As you can see here, the coverage, while they're in LA, they cover about 50 zip codes, and then they'll be expanding into other cities. Again, the model is really touching the metro areas. That's where it matters, where you can get that density. So that's an example. I'll just stop here and I'll pass it on to Marcos. Marcos, if you want to continue with the case study. Thank you.
Sure thing, Andre. So we thought we would bring this to life with a case study. And this is a multi-billion-dollar e-commerce and retail player. Naturally, like every company, it's always asking itself, can I do better in both dimensions, my customer service, as well as my cost profile, my inventory turns, et cetera. I see there is a comment flowing in there. We'll take a look at comments in a little while and try to address a lot of the comments. And by the way, if you wanted to drop questions in the chat, please feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll definitely come back to those questions. So this particular company is interested in, I need to reduce my operating costs, right? Cost of logistics, and I want to start to consider a future network that can deliver competitive speeds. The approach that they took was obviously to establish a team that could address the analytical requirements of such an effort, and through establishing that team and collecting all of the information, then figure out how are we going to reduce our logistics costs. Are there levers that we can pull on? Can we optimize product flow, inventory, transportation, et cetera? And then ultimately, what's our future going to look like, right? So this is a logical question if you're investing in doing such an assessment or such a strategy reformulation. The result of this was a lot of tweaks on product flow, certainly some changes on network strategy, ultimately unlocking $50 million in cost savings, and on the futuristic side, an evaluation of, do we see a future where we have MFC's micro fulfillment center footprint, or where we leverage our store network to establish same day, next day, right? And do so keeping our costs low. Next slide. And so Andre talked a good bit about this, right? So your traditional flow, end to end, right? We're not just talking last mile now, we're talking end to end distribution network. From the plan to your customer flows a step by step. It's that green line in the middle, and it's rather rigid, right? It's a very static flow of product, and that flow has started to become more dynamic. That's what this is attempting to show, right? So if you look at the red lines, you have the possibility of skipping steps, basically, right? So can I go from my plan to my retail store? Can I go from my plan to local DC and then flow traditionally from there? And the flip side is, can I also do last mile from the plant or from a regional DC, which is the blue lines at the bottom? So you're introducing a lot of new variables that we can now manage because we have analytical capabilities within our operations that can manage this very dynamic environment, right? So there is a lot of value hidden in this supply chains, and by virtue of implementing these technologies and new distribution models, you can unlock that value. Next slide. this is kind of the output view, right? So we went through a number of scenarios, and we wanted to sort of start the conversation with what are we trying to get to, right? We're trying to get to a view of our world today, which is the baseline, and then come up with scenarios that may deliver increased value for us, whether it's revenue generating value, service level generating value, customer retention, or cost profile, inventory profile. And so these scenarios that you see here, and Gaurav is going to get into a little bit more detail relative to modeling these in an actual AI-enabled modeling tool. But for simplicity's sake, right? So scenario one is you're optimizing your baseline, right? You're really kind of concentrating the use of your distribution centers, and then making sure you regionalize how product flows out of those distribution centers. And so in doing so, there's a, and you can see the numbers here, right? There's a $10 million reduction in this example. Of course, we've adjusted some of the numbers, but that percentage is real. So 18%. And then on scenario two, you introduce parcel hubs, right? So all of your distribution partners have parcel hubs, and these are essentially cross-docking locations, right? So you're flowing your product through this cross-docking locations, skipping zones, right, enabling you to reach customers at a lower price. There is, however, a service level impact on this particular scenario, on this particular network. That's obviously product dependent and company dependent, but in this particular scenario, it's a higher savings level, almost 30%, but an impact on service level. And then the last scenario, which is the scenario three, which is store fulfillment, micro fulfillment, also a very sizable savings rate with 28%. But more importantly, right, this idea that can I get to the kind of network that would be competitive with what the future is showing us with players like Amazon, right? And in this view, right, you are essentially taking inventory and leveraging your network to use that. So not to forget, right, the inventory levels are comparable in the first two, and then inventory level would be a function of product flow at the store network if we were using a store network. And of course, the greatest value creation out of this one is one-day delivery. Next slide. And so wanted to basically show you the same thing, right, on the left side here, but so you could intuitively sort of look at the progression of savings on the cost side, the impact on delivery days, and then the ultimate fastest network delivery potential with that future scenario. And then of course, addressing all of the value levers is what any company is looking for, right? And you see substantial ranges in terms of impact across sales, margin, inventory, and logistics cost. And as Andre mentioned, the whole impact on environmental and sustainability would probably take another presentation on that subject. So we're not devoting a lot of time on that subject here, but certainly a big deal for our consumers as these supply chains evolve. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to make sure that you got a chance to see this in terms of how actual modeling happens, and I mean at a high level, of course, but just to get a sense for it. And Gaurav is going to go through that in great detail. Of course, there is a number of inputs, right, that go into any sort of modeling exercise. There's this AI-powered network design models, and then there is what do I need to do across my pillars of creating that model that I want for my supply chain. And when I think about that, right, we think about structurally the number of assets and the number of locations. But I also, more importantly, perhaps, and we generate a ton of value out of this without changing a single box, is how do I flow product through these through these locations, right? Gaurav? You're on mute, Gaurav.
Sorry about that. So thanks, Marcos, for giving us an overview of how the modeling exercises and the results are there around the case study. Now we'll do a quick uh, uh, demo of one of the network design tools which we use, which is OptiFlow, which is centered around DTC and parcels. So let me first show you how, just picking up where Marcos left, which is looking at the cost and service levels as a summary view, and then we'll get into detailed network design of how to build these models. So as you saw, this is what the costs look like, across different scenarios. Similarly, once you build different models, you can compare this different scenarios in OptiFlow tool, which is your total cost, and that can be broken down into cost heads like transportation cost from on the first and the middle mile, supplier to warehouse or plant to warehouse, and warehouse to warehouse. For example, hubs was warehouse to warehouse, and then warehouse to customer. So this is just a view and of how you make these comparisons. And now let's get into how do we start modeling these tools. So first, I'll start that how you could use these software itself. So in this platform, or for that matter, any supply chain design software model platform, you start with creating a baseline model. So that's step one. And to create these models, typically we once we have model is created, we start analyzing the transportation data, the order data. So a supply chain is a function of how the product is flowing, where are the nodes, what SKUs, what are the costs. So it's really a digital twin of your physical supply chain. But for any mathematical model to be trusted, first we need to create a model which mimics your supply chain in terms of actual KPI, which is cost and service. That's why we create baseline, which does nothing, but it just replicates your historicals. So in this historical flow, you can see, what was the products. For simplicity, we are just, we aggregated all product into single product. But for large models, you can create SKU level models, which can be 10,000, 20,000 SKUs, even higher. Then for customers, we aggregate more customers typically to 3-zip or 5-zip levels. For US, there are 40,000 5-zip levels and about 1,000 to 1,500 3-zip levels. So for the sake of simplicity, we recommend aggregating the customer data. Then you can create the demand, which could be number of packages, number of units, depending on how the supply chain is existing. You can load in your supplier information if you're not a manufacturer and you're a drop shipper or just procuring goods from suppliers, or you can load in your manufacturing information, the work centers, and you can make complex models as well. But since this is focused on fulfillment distribution, so we'll focus more on that side. So you can start layering your inventory holding nodes, which are really your warehouses, and the cross-docks, which are your parcel hubs to deliver the entire customer. So you can load the locations, their capacity, so on and so forth. And the two differentiator for OptiFlow compared to other supply chain design softwares on the market is our ability to quickly load parcel rate contracts. So parcel rate contracts are very complex compared to truckload, less than truckload. They are done at zones level. So there are zones. There are different service levels. 1 day, 2 day. 1 day is priority, standard, overnight. Then there's domestic 2 day. There's express saver. And then there is ground and smart post. So there are a bunch of different things, but you can load all these contracts very easily, including surcharges, and that makes modeling very easy for these kind of network analytics. Once you have loaded everything, you can load in all the constraints. You can run the scenario based on the flow constraints for the past, and what you get is the baseline. Now, baseline looks ugly for the lack of better word, but that is the reality. This is what we saw for one of our customers when they were, they had 3 distribution centers, but when we looked at their flow profile, they were serving all customers from all location, which was very inefficient. And that's how a lot of supply chains look, and people just don't know. So that's why doing a baseline and optimizing baseline is valuable standalone, even if you're not looking futuristic. Once the baseline is done, then as you can see, the baseline cost was 60 million. 6 million was first mile, middle cost, and then 53 million was around warehouse to customer cost. So DCs were shipping directly to customer using domestic two-day, and the average distance from DCs to customers was about 1,000 miles. So pretty significant distance, even with a 3 DC network. So then we did unconstrained version of the baseline, that if you were to just flow the product optimally without making any investments in your physical network, you can just do that by optimizing your inventory and regionalizing your service area. So if you do that, this is how the flow profile should look like. And these are the assignments, optimal assignments. Once you throw in the SKUs, it will also tell you how the SKUs should be placed at different DCs in what quantity. And then the cost here, if you can see, scenario one cost dropped from 59 to 48 million. So that's like 10 million decrease just by tweaking some settings. So ton of value. The warehouse to customer distance dropped from 1,000 miles to 600 miles, almost 40% reduction. So this is the value of network analytics, network optimization. And then obviously we built some other scenarios around, introducing hub location, which is cross-dock, as Marcos and Andre mentioned, that you can leverage your parcel provider network more efficiently by having a zone skip program. So zone skipping means that you are building a truckload and of your packages and injecting and sending that truckload directly to the more regional areas. Anyways, FedEx or FedEx, UPS, USPS, they'll do it if you give your package to them, but they'll charge a fee. So if you do it yourself, you might be able to save a lot of money there as well. And we have analyzed that those savings are also significant. So 49 million from scenario one drops to about 41 million. So 7 million difference. So you do incur some cost sending packages to the hubs, but then you save a lot on last mile. And the last scenario which we did was very so this one, as we mentioned, the delivery speed reduces because you're going first to the hub and then to the end consumer. So it adds a day. So the 2 day becomes 3 day, but then there is cost saving. So we are not saying like this is the great, this is a great model. It's a lower speed model, but not all businesses need that speed. So it really depends what kind of business you are in. If you have captive consumer base and you don't need to serve them at a very high speed and the customers are cost conscious, then maybe this is the right strategy. But if you are in a generic supply chain and you need that speed to increase sales, then maybe some other model works. So it really depends on your business strategy. And this last strategy is how do I get like a 1 day, same day footprint using my micro fulfillment or store network. So this talks about, getting using your 3DC network, getting that flows to these stores and then serving the customers really from these stores. And that has a different cost profile. As you can see, the cost increases slightly in this scenario, and there's going to be inventory impact, which is not which has to be done outside the model because inventory analysis. But for similar cost profile, slightly higher, you can achieve next day service level as well. So that's the that's more or less some of the things you could do with this modeling exercise. There are detailed reports which you can download for each of the model, and these could look like your cost reports between different lanes, your throughput reports, your plant production reports, so on and so forth. Because as a result of these modeling exercises, you need these reports to configure the systems or help with execution of it at a very detailed level. So all those can be done with running these analytics and having it aligned with your business strategy. So that was more or less about it. Now we can open the floor for questions and we can tackle them as they come. So maybe I should
maybe
just
I think. Yeah, there was one question that came up while we were talking, and it's which was hold on here. It's the question from John here, which was, so a few companies actually have the right density to make the same day work. Cost Amazon is correct. Retailers have to keep in mind that Amazon has a massive share of delivery. You're right. Amazon has about 42% market share. It might have gone down with Temu. I'm not sure. But what strategy do you guys offer for the wild majority that could never actually make this work? So if you're just one of many different retailers, it's going to be very hard for you to match Amazon. But the power of I guess the masses here is what we're counting on. I've always been baffled that FedEx supply chain or UPS supply chain, with all their big network and the ability to invest, why they haven't developed any national level at the across big cities, national kind of shared warehouse model. They haven't, which is a fact. The best approach here would be to use like a company like a Gently, if you're in cold chain, maybe a company like Real Cold. They offer something similar. Those are the companies you would want to go to it's really consolidation of the different volume. And you don't need the big numbers that Amazon has, because you can achieve critical mass and get unit costs down within you don't need to have the same level of market share. What matters is getting that market share and being able to, we're getting a sufficient amount of volume in a specific area. So in a specific zip code, that's what really matters. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's a really good question. And I think there is, an opportunity here to do fulfilled by Amazon, just not by Amazon. And I think there's a growing number of companies that are starting to offer this.
Great. I see there's another question by John around recommendation to use a lot of MFC, and then how do you mitigate the cost impact of level of segmented inventory? I think it's a related question, but great question again. So what we have seen best-in-class retailers do is they segment their inventories. So you don't have to position all the SKUs in your forward network. You can hold back. You can segment your inventory in SKUs which are fast selling, SKUs which are low selling. Add like other components, dimensions around margins and cost and things like that. And then you can focus on group of SKUs which also go together, because for making a package that is very important, and hold them in the store or micro fulfillment, because even a store cannot hold those SKUs. So inventory problem doesn't go away whether you are using a MFC or a store location. But to manage that distributed inventory and regionalization inventory, you need to have an inventory segmentation strategy before you go down the path of choosing what SKU to be hold at what places. But good question. Thanks.
There's another question: how to handle seasonal spikes and the unexpected increases. Would anyone want to take that? Or
yeah. So the retailer, which Marcos, do you want to go on that?
No, I wanted to sort of go back up to the beginning, but yeah, we can go with this one first, and then we'll go back to the beginning.
Okay, so that's a great question. So gifting as a business is highly seasonal. So the case study which you looked at, which is gift retailer, that is actually for a business which does 60% business in just 5 weeks of their whole year. And yes, I agree, it could be unexpected and there are spikes always, but we are trying to assess how can you deliver goods to the customer fast and at low cost. So irrespective of what that spike is, whenever that S&OP process occurs and your demand planning occurs, whenever you're doing supply planning, irrespective of whatever is the demand, whether it's high or low, as long as you give enough time to spread the inventory out, you'll have a low cost profile. Now, there could be times when the spike occurs and then the manufacturing location is at a place which overseas, and you just don't have the time to get the inventory the right location, and you have to pay to serve your customer demand. We have seen cases like that where the anticipation occurs very last minute, and then the product is produced and it is like directly shipped from a non-optimal DC, and that's hard to control. But our advice there is that have that visibility at least 3 to 4, 5 weeks out, and do better get better on demand prediction, so that you can have better supply allocation and time for getting the inventory in the right location.
Yeah. I think at some point we'll open up the mics, right, Gaurav? Or can
Yep.
people open up their own mic if they want to jump in and say something? But before we do that, I just wanted to put that out there that we might be able to do that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to read the questions and then we can
Sure.
decide who takes a stab, right? So first one after the first ones that we just did. I would also be curious on any category specific insights you might have. Examples of clothing versus home good retailers. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it could be other categories, right? I mean, the example we did was gifts. We have other examples in pet food, right? We have examples in perishables, but high quality goods. So there's there's a lot of examples that we could probably go after, right? And think about the dynamics, sort of how they change. I think ultimately everyone is kind of thinking about this sort of step process, right? And every one of those supply chains will have a little bit of a different need, right? Whether it's scenario 2 or 3. And then ultimately, I think there's a lot of interest in, is there any way I can get to scenario 3, right? Go ahead, Andre.
Marcos, if I can add, so insights that are, I guess, customer or category specific. You mentioned clothing. Clothing can become really complicated because you have small, medium, large, extra large, extra large, and so you have a multitude of different samples and in all locations. Amazon does it, but you need some sophisticated analytics to be able to do that. So that's just one consideration. And the home goods, for example, or you think about a Wayfair or Home Depot, when I guess a lot of people look online, a lot of people buy hardware and Home Depot kind of category stuff on Amazon. But going back, I guess what's important is also you want to standardize. Something that's less than 20 pounds, something smaller than a microwave, or even smaller yet, because you can't handle canoes or snowblowers or things of that nature, right? You have to have some kind of specialization. So you might have a fulfillment center for small goods, and you might have one for oversized. That's one way of handling it. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but certainly size and the different categories matters. And so as to the feasibility of doing something like this, I guess the smaller number of SKUs and the smaller your actual SKUs or perfumes and cosmetics, right, or something that is relatively small, that would be ideal, and so you don't have the complexity of multiple kind of different sizes, and that would be a good example of or even pods of coffee, things of that nature would be really, really simple to implement. So I'll stop there, but to give you some flavor of different things that we've seen.
Great, thanks, Andre. There's a question around the OptiFlow tool, whether we can look at the total cost, and that's a great question actually, because transportation is only one thing. Although for DTC, transportation is like the biggest, but I just in the interest of time I did not show this extended feature. So if you unlock this, then you can look at all the components of the cost. So there's transportation. There is the variable cost, fixed cost for plant and DCs. There is inventory carrying costs. We even go to shelf life penalty costs as in-transit inventory cost. So you can capture all these costs. Depends on how complex and detailed models you want to create. But that's true. Like you need to look at all costs in totality to see differences and impact across different elements of the supply chain. So great question. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, the next question is very insightful session. What are the current AI trends in supply chain? Are key departments getting impacted or expected to impact drastically? Are any active tools players in the market to look for AI supply chain? Who wants to start?
I can go. So if you were to supply chain is demand and supply, right, at the core of it. And AI, with respect to AI technologies, broadly what we learn is there is machine learning and there is mathematical optimization, which have drastically helped which has been helping supply chain get better. So now there is machine learning models, there's neural networks and things like that. But really, with those pattern recognition type of applications, you can get better at demand forecasting, which is very true for any supply chain, because better demand means better forecast, means lesser stockouts, and you're building to serve the demand, not overbuilding or underbuilding. Similarly, you have mathematical optimization, which is linear programming, and deterministic optimization, which can help you reduce your cost and try to minimize cost or maximize revenue and generate very efficient plans. So a lot of legacy supply chain planning companies, design and planning companies are embedding these AI technologies into their tools itself. But there's a whole range of how things are happening, especially for last mile fulfillment. There are companies which are doing using traveling salesman problem and embedding AI into generating those optimal routes, which can get you to keep your cost under control as you try to compete with the FedExes and the UPSs of the world. So these are providing good tools to enable things on last mile, which is execution, and then on the design and planning is where other companies are working. So every company is like embedding AI. There's no AI focused company, because every company has to adopt AI to do these things better.
I think that's a good way to sort of summarize that, right? I think that that's exactly what's happening. So if I look at any company, it doesn't matter which technology company it is, they're trying to figure out how does AI fit into their solution. And if you look at supply chain, which typically from a department standpoint, right, part of the question was the functions. So almost every supply chain that I've seen is organized into the planning function, the sourcing function, the manufacturing scheduling, and partnership function, and the distribution and logistics function, which is the one that we talked about a lot in this discussion. I am seeing technology in every single one of these, right? AI or otherwise. In the planning function, there is a lot, because the planning function is the one that deals with what's the demand, right? What's the demand going to be? What's the supply going to be? And can I figure out how it might be affected on either side? The sourcing function, smart contracts are the subject of conversation on the blockchain side, right? A lot. So there's a lot of activity around how is sourcing going to evolve, and how we're going to get better knowledge about the suppliers that serve us. And then similarly in manufacturing, right? Internally within manufacturing, there's a lot of IoT applications, et cetera. And then distribution and logistics, we just talked a lot about that, but there's traceability, right, in that chain as well. And there is some great IoT applications there, GPS applications, et cetera. And actually, we know companies here in the US, we know companies in other parts of the world, in Latin America, right, that are doing a lot of these things. So it's a fast moving train, and I think we're all trying to kind of get on board or stay on board.
Perhaps is it possible to open the mics to if there are anybody has additional questions? Oh, there's another question.
I think there's another question. Yep.
Marcos, you want to read it?
Yeah. There's growing cybersecurity concerns with cloud-based solutions. How do you address a client who may be hesitant to upload sensitive data to build models?
Thanks, Thomas. So we have heard that question. In fact, we had a customer in Russia, and they said, Russia PwC, I don't want to name the customer, but they were like, we don't want to upload the data on cloud. We just want this to be running on-prem. So that was the only geography which we heard, which was averse to that. But to answer cybersecurity questions, we got a SOC 2 compliance. So SOC 2 is like a framework to make sure that any SaaS company or it's a basically a stamp to say that everything is secure. So a lot of we got SOC 2 compliance, and all the cloud-based security tools are going through that thing. And yeah, I think probably Russia has special regulations related to data produced within the borders. So maybe that was the reason. So it's country specific, but it's talking just about US. We use AWS and Snowflake. So any application you take, right, whether companies are wanting to push their data into a data lake, so everything is cloud. So it is generally not hosted on-prem. These are hosted on company servers, and there is a questionnaire which each company has. It's called IT security questionnaires, and you have to fill that out. And if you comply with all those questions, they are very comfortable using these software solutions. So that has been our experience working with the retailers on how to get the comfort that the systems are secure and there's no breach around that.
Great. A lot of valid opportunities, valid concerns, things to consider. Gaurav, this unmute thing doesn't quite work.
So I think we'll have to just, if somebody has a question, they can raise a hand and maybe we can unmute if somebody needs to, because there are 30 people. So if you unmute everybody, it'll become noisy. But if somebody wants to ask a question, you can just raise your hand and then we can unmute that particular person. Or you can just type, either ways.
Got it.
While we're waiting, perhaps we can go to some key takeaways, and
Yep.
that might help answer some questions.
Totally. Let's do that. Maybe that'll
Yeah.
generate some questions. Do you want to put that back up? So real quick, right? Yeah, I think it's that one. Real quick, the key takeaways, right? So clearly, right, there is a significant value that companies, one, should consider unlocking, and some of that value is within network strategies realm, which is what we talked about today. There's a lot of value in other aspects of supply chain, and we are supply chain practitioners, so other areas are worth exploring. The numbers are significant, and the value proposition on both ends of the spectrum is high, as the second point mentions, which is delivery is getting faster, significantly faster. And that whole delivery experience changes the sales cycle. It changes sales results and customer retention. So it's really important that companies start to ask themselves these sort of like front end questions or future questions of what is their product? How does their product compete? And what do I have to do for my product relative to serving my customer base? Number three is, data-driven AI-powered tools. These are new capabilities, or actually in some cases existing capabilities that have been around for a while. We just didn't realize it, but they're now in our lingo, right? In fact, a lot of the optimization stuff is AI, but it's been around for a while. It wasn't part of our language every day, right? So these are critical to enabling not just the micro-fulfillment centers or the stores, but DTC more general, right? I talked about the kind of the traditional flow versus the more dynamic model of supply chains, and these technologies are essential to accomplishing that. And lastly, of course, there is variability in terms of product, supply chain, customer base, etc. And so you kind of have to go through the homework, right, in order to decide on what scenario is this an area that works best for you, that will deliver most value to all, to your business. Did that generate any questions or not really? Is it possible to get these? Yeah, absolutely. We might have to clean up a little bit, but yes, absolutely, we can send them to participants. I think that's okay, right? So yes, thanks for asking that. Happy to do it. I'm glad you liked the session. We enjoyed doing it. We enjoyed putting it together, and I think clients are asking these questions more and more. Companies are asking these questions more and more because of the value potential. All right. Well, I think we're almost there. There is one more question. What obstacles inhibit companies from doing all this analysis?
That's a
What
great
else?
question.
Mm,
That's a great question. So I'll tell you some of the objections which we have faced. What stops companies from doing this analysis. Sometimes these building these data models is not easy, right? It requires a lot of work and it requires a lot of analytical horsepowers, and sometimes just people just don't have bandwidth inside the company, and they are just not. Sometimes they get scared that oh, what will do to my current ongoing implementations on OMS or WMS and TMS systems. We are not ready to take the outputs of these optimizations. Sometimes we hear that it looks good all on paper, but when you really boil it down to execution, I don't think so we are going to have as many savings and things like that. So I think it's just sometimes it's lack of awareness that you don't need a ton of another question is that, okay, you do it once, but when I have to refresh it and then you are gone, then how do I make sure that this network design models can be refreshed continuously? So these are the things, and there are obviously different answers, fair concerns, but I think it's better to get started to not get started, because you don't know what value you'll find in your network. Maybe whatever value you find, you may be able to set up your own COE with the savings which you'll generate, or you can work with a partner. So our humble submission to every company is that if you're not doing it right now, at least start thinking about it, so that maybe you can start embedding AI into this decision making. And we have like a lot of very knowledgeable partners here on this call, and our consulting partners very strong in their analytics and approaches, and they can help you get started, so you don't have to do that all heavy lifting yourself.
Very good question. Yes, almost everything is sort of hard to go after, right? There's always obstacles. It's creating that sort of sense of value, right? It's kind of get people to appreciate the potential and taking some steps to get there. Very good question. All right, guys. Well, I think we're 1 minute off. Really enjoyed the session. Appreciated everyone that joined and threw questions at us to make it more engaging. Andre, Gaurav, thank you so much for joining and being part of this.
And if anyone has any questions or wants to know more about the topic, just to reach out to us. We'll be making the slides available. We'll be making the webinar recording available, I believe, as well. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll send the recording and the deck to everybody with our email IDs, of course. So in case there are questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Happy weekend.
Okay. Happy weekend. Bye-bye.